Live from KingArthur.com, it's Peter Cross, caught in the crossfire. Now you're in the crosshairs. Where should we start? How far back should we go? Tell us how it began.
Well, I think we should go back way further than we did before.
Yeah, come on.
Yeah, I want to go back to my grandfather in Nazi Germany, who was one of the first psychiatrists that there were. He was a contemporary of Freud, and he lived in Berlin, and he was very Jewish. And one day, Albert Einstein brought his nephew to my grandfather for treatment of schizophrenia. And from what I understand, he treated him for several years and was pretty successful. It seemed to work well, and Einstein was impressed with him and also lived in Berlin, and they became close personal friends. Einstein and my grandfather and his wife. Their names were Otto and Elisa. And in the early 30s, Einstein emigrated to the United States, moved there, left Germany behind. My grandparents stayed on for reasons, same reasons a lot of people stayed. They just couldn't bring themselves to leave their home, even though things were getting indescribably awful. And they had to go into hiding from the Gestapo because my grandfather was targeted for several reasons. He was Jewish, he was an intellectual, and he was a psychiatrist, and they didn't like any of those things. So they went into hiding, and at the time, you couldn't get into the United States unless there was somebody here, a citizen, who would sponsor you. And I believe sponsoring meant that somebody had to sign papers for you and pretty much guarantee that you would get a job and not end up on welfare. And Einstein did that for my grandparents, and he also paid their passage over. And they came in, I think, 1936 or 1937 and moved into an apartment in New York City. Einstein was living in Princeton, New Jersey. And not too long after that, Einstein also got my father and his sister, my aunt, out, and that was my whole family. And they were all close friends. My grandmother used to bake him cookies and send him cookies over there because he seemed to have a habit of obsessing on work and not eating. And they wrote a lot of letters back and forth. And he attended my parents' wedding. And my parents told me stories about how he used to bounce me on his knee, but of course I have no memory of that. I was a baby. I only know these things from what my parents told me. And interestingly enough, he attended their wedding. That I know. And he wrote a letter of recommendation for my father to help my father get a job. And my father kept that and gave it to me. I inherited that letter. And to make a long story short, when I went through the atomic holocaust of divorce, my ex, who I like to call the bitch, has that thing, and it ended up in her attic because none of them have any understanding of the value of something like that. So it's in a dusty place in her attic, and she doesn't care about it. And the interesting ending to this story, which isn't really an ending, is that tomorrow, that's where I'm headed. I'm going up to Westport, Connecticut, to be at my younger son's high school graduation. And when I get to that town, my very first act before I do anything else is to go over there and get my hands on the Einstein and get it back. And when I do get it back, I'm going to do a lot of things with it. It's getting mounted in the most prominent and best place in my room, and I'm going to scan it onto JPEG too, and I intend to write a nice interesting web page about this whole story and put that letter up there and put it in a prominent place on my website, because there's a whole lot more that can be said too, but I think that's enough on the subject for right now. Hold it and just wait till you see it on the website.